All right, I got a feature that says recording. I think you all should have got a permission to record question, or at least see it on yours. All right. And so we're gonna get started, and I'm do a little countdown for myself, just 5 seconds, so I have easy edit space.
Okay.
Mhm. Hey, welcome to an episode of The Maxim Hunter. I'm Robert, the Maxim Hunter, where I am trying to learn some spiritual truths to apply to my life personally. I'm going to be investigating different religious perspectives, beliefs, and faiths. And today I'm really excited to have Mr. Todd and Mr. Malik with me from the Bahai faith to share some things about their faith and how we can benefit and learn from them. So Mr. Todd, Mr. Malik, if you could say hello to everyone and tell us a little bit about yourself, just one line.
Okay. I guess I'll start. My name is Malik Nash. I live here in Baltimore City. I'm a husband and a father, and I am grateful that you had us on this podcast episode. I appreciate it.
No problem, brother.
And I'm Todd Rutstein. I also live in Baltimore City, actually not so very far from Malik. I have 4 adult sons and happily married for coming up on 36 years. Seems like a good long time. And been in Baltimore since 1984. I'm a history teacher, middle school. And I really appreciate your invitation, Robert.
Hey, well, I thank you both very much for joining me to sit down and talk about some questions and to explore your faith with you, and even for inviting me for the study circle. I've been enjoying it and been learning and growing and seeing ways to apply those truths to my life. Particularly, I was really drawn to the Baha'i faith because of your idea of progressive revelation that I thought was unique. You know, many faiths that I've been a part of or learned from believe that God has been teaching humanity little by little over time, and so that's common. But you all seem to listen for God's voice in what other people would think are other religions. But for you all, it's not the case because you have an idea of one religion. And so that really drew me to see what I could learn from your faith and wanted to see what positive truths I could apply to my life. And so before I guess we could talk about progressive revelation and those types of things, I guess we have to look at one of the core principles of your faith, which would be unity and oneness, if I'm not mistaken. So if you could just share with folks the Baha'i perspective on unity and oneness in your own words.
Sure.
Why don't you dive in, Malik?
Okay. So that idea of progressive revelation that you mentioned, I think, is foundational to what I understand to be the concept of unity and oneness. Excuse me, in the Baha'i teachings. The Baha'i teachings say that this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. And in my mind, that means that revelation is a process that never ends. God is always interacting with humanity, and just like a parent raises a child and gives them understanding that's appropriate to their stage of development, in the same way, God gives us revelations that are appropriate to the stage of humanity's development throughout history. And just as a child is not a separate series of people, but it's
Right.
one person that's going through different stages. In the same way, humanity is one, and
Wow.
humanity is evolving through different stages. And as we see it, the Baha'i revelation is the revelation that's been given to us for the stage of humanity's maturity. We've gone through our childhood, we've gone through our adolescence, and we're emerging into our maturity, where we
Gotcha.
will manifest our capacity to live as one people.
Wow.
That's in a nutshell my thoughts about unity and oneness in the Baha'i teachings.
Yeah,
Thank you, Miss.
there's a quotation that comes to mind You know, whenever I try to quote in front of other people, I sometimes mess up, but I have a very good partner here because Malik is very good at reciting memorized stuff. It goes, this is from Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder, the messenger of God who founded the Baha'i faith. To that which the Lord hath ordained as the sovereign remedy and the mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith.
Mm.
And, you know, just a few thoughts to add to what Malik said. You know, I like to use a sort of an analogy to illustrate this concept of the oneness of religion, right? These two aspects of oneness, oneness of religion, oneness of humanity, and of course, oneness of God. These really inform and illuminate each other. But as an educator, I like to use this analogy. Imagine, you know, students completing fourth grade, say, and at the very end of the year, the teacher praises these kids, right? And says, and I'm so delighted to have you back next year because you cannot trust that fifth grade teacher, right? It's about fourth grade, right? It boggles the mind to imagine an educational system like that, right?
Absolutely.
In the wonderful fourth grade teacher is praising those kids and saying, you are going to love the fifth grade teacher. I have prepared you for that wonderful fifth grade teacher, you know, because this is all one system of education, right? The fourth grade teacher had the knowledge to teach the fifth grade, but the child wasn't ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this helps me understand the concept of the oneness of religion and progressive revelation, and that, you know, God made a pact with Abraham to never leave humanity alone without guidance. And so periodically we have the renewal of religion to meet the needs of the stage of development in which humanity has moved into, right? So Baha'u'llah is the return of that one same spirit manifesting the will of God, right? The mouthpiece of God for today, just as Muhammad was Christ, Moses, Buddha for their day, right? And as Malik said, this is ever unfolding, right? We have new stages of spiritual development to emerge into. And today, you know, as Malik was touching on, it's living out the truth of the principle of the oneness of humanity, right? This is an undeniable fact. And Baha'u'llah has brought a blueprint for doing the work of unifying in order to live out that principle, right? The oneness of humanity is a fact. The unity is going to take some hard work to properly mirror that oneness.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that your beliefs from about humanity and religion both stem first from the concept that there's oneness and unity in God. Would I be right in thinking that? What could you say about just a short snippet of how you view in the Baha'i faith, maybe a theology of God's oneness, His unity, and how that informed the perspectives about religion and humanity?
So,
As
um,
I
so an analogy that is often used in the Baha'i writings is the analogy of God being like the sun. It's possible to experience the effects of the sun and to encounter the qualities of the sun, the heat, the light, the the splendor of the sun.
Right.
But you will never be able to approach the sun and understand its inner essence. It's far transcendent above any experience that we can have, or any capacity to comprehend its inner reality. And this is an analogy. Um, and in the same way, we can experience God's qualities, His justice, His love,
Yeah.
His His compassion, um, but His essence, His reality, is far transcendent above anything that we can comprehend, or directly grasp. And so um, there's so many verses in the Bahai teachings that talk about God being transcendent above all things,
Right.
and being above even description. Um, that that's
Understandable.
yes, and that's foundational to the teachings of our faith, that God's inner essence is transcendent above all things.
Absolutely. All right. All right. Mr. Todd.
There's a there's a phrase that we're accustomed to in the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah says God is an unknowable essence, right?
Mm.
Which fits perfectly with what Malik was just saying. You know, so that means we can't think of God as a man. You know, sometimes, you know, that like a man in the sky, right? You know, and and there are other passages in the writings that where this is expounded upon, that the idea of a creature knowing its creator is really impossible, right? And on a very simple example, we might say, you know, a craftsman or an artisan who builds a beautiful table, right? The table has no capacity to understand the artisan who created it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's in keeping with the laws of reality that God should be an unknowable essence to us. But the attributes are knowable.
Right.
And this is the purpose of the manifestation of God. You know, the term manifestation of God is used in the Baha'i writings. Um, you know, sometimes I suppose for folk who may not be familiar with that term, they might be more familiar with messenger or prophet. But the manifestation of God is such a useful term for me because this is a special spiritual teacher who is endowed with the capacities to perfectly reflect the attributes of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even the manifestation, Baha'u'llah writes beautifully about how far beyond his comprehension God is, right? But
Right.
Baha'u'llah, in the past, Muhammad, Christ, Moses, these intermediaries, the manifestation of God, makes God's will known unto us because we cannot know it otherwise. We need that intermediary. And this is a beautiful expression of love that God
Mm-hmm.
has for us to send these manifestations of God.
Now, many of my listeners are going to be like, I keep hearing them list certain leaders from particular religions. If you don't mind just sharing, if you could, if there is a list, but if there are particular manifestations in the past that the Baha'i faith particularly recognizes, and and then what the Baha'is views of are those in short snippet, uh, either one of you.
Yeah, you know, so this is jumping ahead a little bit, but having been raised as a Baha'i, I can remember as a child in children's
Mm-hmm.
classes learning. In fact, there was a song, you know, I remember this song, the person who wrote the song, it was designed to teach children about the oneness of religion. It wasn't meant to be exhaustive, right? But
Right.
it mentioned Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, Abraham, Moses, Christ, Muhammad, the Bab, who's the forerunner of Baha'u'llah, B-A-B,
Absolutely.
Baha'u'llah. But this is not exhaustive, right? In fact, Baha'u'llah refers to, there are manifestations of God that precede recorded history, right?
Okay.
Because
Right.
again, this this uh, this is intrinsic to the relationship between the human being and God, to have that process, that intermediary available to us. I mean, I named some, right?
Right.
There are others, and certainly, we recognize the role that lesser prophets played in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we we it's I think it's been clear from the comments we've made that we revere the authenticity of all the world's great religions. Again, they're part of a single process. Um, Baha'u'llah's revelation picks up upon all that was unfolded uh, prior to it. But um, I don't know if you have some other thoughts about that, Malik.
No, I think that gets to the heart of it pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm right with you. God's been teaching His people since the dawn of time
Hmm.
the lessons they need for that particular time, and we can name a few very, very important prophets and teachers from various cultures and faiths. But the ones that you typically name are some of the ones revered as manifestations of God, and obviously, I think popular faith today, Christianity, of course, hears Jesus Christ in there, and so they would want to know what you would say more, particularly to Jesus Christ. But then I think everyone's going to want to know a bit about the Bob and Bahu'ala. Could you help us out with that? Your view of Jesus, and then the manifestation of God that you are currently came in your faith to help us gain maturity, as you said.
Hmm. So, um, that's an especially challenging one for me, because of the particular circumstances that I grew up in. I grew up in an environment of mixed religions. Some of my
Okay.
family was Christian, some of my family was Muslim, some of them didn't have any particular belief at all. Um,
Interesting.
and it, it it was sort of a continuum. Everyone's sort of supported one another in their spirituality, um, and of course, um, individuals have their particular convictions and they hold on to those,
Mhm.
but it wasn't a source of separation. Um,
Wonderful.
and and it's hard for me to think of um, these faiths as being as being separate in some way. So it's a little tricky. Um,
Absolutely. That's no problem.
yeah. Um, but to speak to the question of Jesus Christ in particular, um, I suppose I can say truthfully, that he is my light. He, he is, um, mm, my strength, um,
Mhm.
and I see him manifested in the reality of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. That's
Could you
that.
could you
That's it.
tell us a little of them and
Sure,
how you see that?
sure. Um, so before Baha'u'llah announced his revelation, there was a teacher who appeared, in Baha'u'llah's native land in Persia, as it was called at the time, and he announced that he was preparing the way for Baha'u'llah, that he had come to ready the world for this new revelation. And he took the title the Bab to indicate his role in his relationship to Baha'u'llah. The Bab is a word that means the gate, and so he would be the gate that Baha'u'llah came through. And he spread those teachings. He met with intense opposition from the clergy in Iran at the time, and it was so intense, in fact, that he was executed. And subsequent to his execution, Baha'u'llah received his revelation. He had actually been a follower of the Bab and had not received any revelation at that time. But when Baha'u'llah was imprisoned after the Bab's execution, while he was in prison in a deep dungeon, it was essentially a sewer that he was locked in.
Wow.
Yeah, and while he was in chains in that dungeon, he received a divine revelation announcing that he was the promised one that the Bab had foretold. And so Baha'u'llah represents the fulfillment of the revelations that prepared us previously. Just as we said before, we see revelation as a process, and that process has prepared us for the revelation that we've received for this day. And so Baha'u'llah represents the fulfillment and the reflection of all that came before.
All right, thank you, brother. Mr. Todd, would you have any thoughts on the Bab and Baha'u'llah?
Yeah, I think Malik really covered sort of a nice introduction. There's, the lives they led, the Bab's revelation was very short-lived. Again, as Malik said, it served the purpose of preparing humanity for the coming of Baha'u'llah. And thousands of the Bab's followers were terribly persecuted, put to death in their own right, and all of them were told, if you recant your faith, you'll be free. And this was such a compelling element of my learning about the Baha'i faith as a young person, and certainly continues today, that these people saw recanting their faith as true death. To give up their Lord would be true death. You can have my body, right? They understood that true life is nearness to God. And so they didn't even occur to them to give up, right? Take my physical existence, right? After all, we may get into this more later. I'm a soul with a body. My soul is everlasting. This body is impermanent. And that was very compelling, and the fact that despite all of this brutal persecution, the faith continued to grow. It was irrepressible, and Baha'u'llah remained a prisoner essentially for the rest of his life, prisoner in exile. But I think I've told you this before, over the course of that time, wrote what's equal to over 100 volumes of scripture. And that Malik was not exaggerating. The name of it is the Sia Chal, which translates to black pit. That was the dungeon prison he was sent to.
Sure. Yeah.
And they considered it a death sentence, because to survive that condition was, almost unheard of. They could not execute him because he was from nobility. His father had a position in the court of the king, and he was being groomed to inherit that position in the court of the king. He could have had a life of tremendous material ease. He chose something else. He chose instead to live a life of service, you know, and championing the downtrodden. In fact, as a young man, he was known as the father of the poor when he was in his 20s, right? This reputation he
Wow.
gained. That's the man they sent to this black pit, right? And he
Don't you find
survived
it interesting
it.
that religious leaders throughout our history and people who have told us a word from God have suffered such severe persecution from other folks who are religious, who believe in God, and the persecutions are severe and difficult. And even despite those, they still somehow shine through a great glorious light of God's glory and grace and kindness and love despite those dark difficulties. I find that interesting. And what would you say, why do you think that happens so often, that people are unreceptive to new revelation from God?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, from my perspective, I think it's a an inherent part of the transformation that um, that religion is intended to create within us. When
Okay.
we encounter that example of selflessness, when we encounter that example of courage, when we encounter um,
Right.
that willingness to sacrifice for the good of others, that touches something in us that nothing else can touch. And
Absolutely.
that's where the power of faith is. In that 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 um, just I don't have the words, and so I'm just I'll just um, share a passage that always stood out to me from the Bahai writings, and it actually is speaking about the Bab, and it says, though young and tender of age, and though the cause he revealed was contrary to the desire of all the peoples of the earth, both high and low, rich and poor, exalted and abased, king and subject, yet he arose and steadfastly proclaimed it. He feared no one. He was regardless of
Wow.
consequences. Uh, and
Wow.
and when we witness that, when we see that, and we can't help but be moved, we can't help but be inspired. We have to ask why. What is it?
Right.
What is it that would create that spirit within someone? And I think that's the source of that transformative power, and that would not be so striking and so powerful otherwise.
Yeah.
You're probably right about that.
I think there's, you know, there's also this, I suppose, an appropriateness to our being tested, you know,
Mm,
that, and I suppose we can see it as an expression of love from God to not just not spoon feed us, right? Because God could easily just make it obvious to all, right?
Mm.
But in a way, there's something beautiful about this expectation that we have a lofty capacity, everyone, right? Regardless, every single soul on the planet has the capacity to recognize uh, the voice of God, right? In fact, and Malik, help me out if I get this wrong. There's a passage in one of Baha'u'llah's most important books called the Book of Certitude, where he says, you know, this this understanding is not dependent upon human learning. It's dependent on freedom of spirit, purity of heart, and chastity of soul. Does that sound right, Malik?
it does. I think you got the spirit of it
So
for sure.
it's
Yeah.
not it, and is don't in the Christian tradition, don't we know the meek shall inherit the earth, right? Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
it's not those who are are super proud of their accomplishments, right? It's not the haughty. In fact, those are veils, really, right? And I think so, we have this common record every time the manifestation has come. They faced tremendous hardship, right?
Mm.
Um,
Right.
in the worst cases, put to death, right? The Bob and Christ have that in common. They were even the same age
Mm.
when that
Wow.
happened. But, you know, terrible persecution. It's the same story for all of them.
Hmm.
It's a challenge to humanity, and it's a kind of, maybe we can think of it too as kind of the birth pangs of transition to a new age. And when you think about it, look at, just as an example, in the Arabian Peninsula today, I mean, it's probably 90 some percent Muslim, right? But
Probably.
when Muhammad came, the Arabs rejected him outright, right? And he faced horrible mistreatment. Um, a small band at first, the unknown,
Hmm.
saw with pure eyes Muhammad. And look at today, that entire region professes deep, reverent adherence to Muhammad and his teachings.
Right. I mean, that you're definitely pulling out faith and humility and the struggles that um, make those things look so beautiful when
Yeah.
they overcome adversity. And that definitely is a common thread throughout the religious traditions and all of the teachers from God. What I think folks want to know is what about the Baha'i faith is so relevant for today's age that we needed a new revelation from God. What is it that we need to apply to our life and our society that needs to change for us to mature?
Hmm. So, up until this point in history, um, human beings have regarded themselves as separate nations, separate populations, separate tribes. Um, however, you want to designate a group of human beings.
Hmm.
And they saw their welfare as separate from the welfare and well-being of
Yeah.
the rest of humanity. Um, and part of that was simply physical. There's geographical barriers, that people couldn't cross. They really didn't have a way of um, socially manifesting the oneness of humankind.
Right.
Um, but for the first time in human history, we're able to perceive all of humanity as one people, and to perceive that as a
Yeah.
spiritual reality as well as a physical as well as a physical reality. And the teachings of Baha'u'llah are a framework for understanding what that oneness means, and for learning how to build communities that are founded on the oneness of mankind. Um,
Hmm.
and so what we're engaged in is a process of trying to translate Baha'u'llah's teachings into reality. And we're trying to do that alongside our friends, our neighbors, our family members, our coworkers, um,
Right.
because you can't create unity by yourself. That's a contradiction in terms.
Right.
and so, and so um, we're learning how to walk this road to unity, and we're looking to learn alongside um, anyone who wants to walk the same road.
Hmm.
And I think that speaks to the needs of this moment. As we can see, we can just browse the headlines for 2 minutes, and we can understand the crying need that we all have for unity. And so I think that's at the core of what makes Baha'u'llah's teachings relevant to the time that we live in.
Now, are you telling me that in a time where we have different beliefs and different cultures and different backgrounds, that it is possible for us to have unity across those barriers?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know,
Hey,
I think I think you will come away tonight, Robert, with no uncertain terms that we have a profound conviction that
mm-hmm,
not only can it
mm-hmm.
happen, it is inevitable.
Okay,
The path, the road there, the part of the road is going to be thorny, right? The path
absolutely.
is, you know, we really expect over time to witness a combination of, you know, hardship and promise, right? You
Mm-hmm,
know, um, there's a beautiful letter that Baha'is have been studying in this country recently, and
mm-hmm.
Malik, you may remember that last paragraph somewhere. This letter is written by the Universal House of Justice, which is the world governing body for Baha'is today. It's an institution
Right.
created by Baha'u'llah. So, and Baha'u'llah said, whatever they say is if I've said it myself. And in this letter, the letter is all about the precious work of eliminating racism, right?
Right.
It's dear. That is that is viewed as the most vital and challenging issue in this country. But
Definitely.
you know, in the last paragraph, we're told to expect. Um, oh, what are those combinations, Malik? Things like um, both hardship and promise. You know, these things that will be challenging, and yet things that are clear, profound signs of hope. You know,
Wow.
and those are both elements of the dynamics of growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, we're now at a stage in world history where there is a level of consciousness of the oneness of humanity, unlike any other period. Quite frankly,
Right.
only 100 years ago, people who were considered knowledgeable were spouting garbage about multiple races that are not equal, right? Now
You're right.
the sciences affirm there is one race, and in fact, affirm that biologically we are all cousins, right? The
Mm-hmm.
most distantly related any two human beings can be is like 50th cousins, right? So the biological aspect is a reflection of a spiritual reality. Um,
Right.
and to me, this pursuit of unity is a reflection of reality, right? We are so interconnected, right? In a sense, but for you, I am not. I as a being, am completely dependent on all of humanity, and we are all members of one human family,
Mm-hmm.
biologically and more profoundly spiritually. So the pursuit of unity is part of our destiny. And just you
Wow.
know, those differences actually just make it more beautiful.
Right.
There's a phrase in the Baha'i faith that we identify as a kind of watchword, and that is unity in diversity, right?
Right.
Not unity is often misunderstood. It's not conformity, it's not uniformity. And it's an outcome and a process, right? There's power in the
Mm-hmm.
process. Baha'u'llah says, so powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth. And
Mm.
so we're very passionate about what the possibilities around that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, I'm listening, and I'm feeling convinced that unity is the course that God wants us to achieve, and that, when it is the will of God, it will occur, it will happen.
Yeah.
And when we think about, however, our current situations, you mentioned racism and I'm sure there are a ton of different prejudices that we could list that currently divide our communities and people within them. Of course, national identities and economic goals and interests and aims. Um, what do you think is some practical steps that a person could take in their everyday life or in community involvement um, that that would be beneficial? And I think at this time would be really good for Mr. Todd for you to explain how the twofold purpose and how that could be something that the Baha'i understanding of that could be very beneficial in our society. I think a lot of religious perspectives really focus on maintaining some sort of like orthodoxy,
Yeah.
and that's like the number one goal. And I'm very interested if you could explain the twofold purpose for everyone, and then kind of go
Yeah.
back to my ideas about prejudice.
Sure. And I think it's relevant. And I'm sure Malik will have some thoughts about it too, because I think this is so central to the kind of learning that Baha'is are eager to do all over the planet. I it's been helpful for me to think in terms of what Baha'is are trying to craft in communities all over the world is a kind of culture of learning,
Hmm.
learning about these processes that can advance humanity. And advancing humanity cannot ignore the pursuit of unity. And again,
Right.
unity in diversity. But that twofold moral purpose can be articulated in many ways. The way I usually express it is this idea of pursuing or committing to my own personal transformation, spiritually, morally, intellectually, and also contributing to the transformation of society.
Right.
And that these two interact upon each other. Um, and, it's not a linear thing. You notice the word then is not in there. It's not
Right. Right.
first myself and then, right? Because we never get to the then, right? In fact, there's something
Absolutely.
beautiful about the courage to step out, maybe feeling inadequate, but knowing that the effort to learn about contributing to the well-being of society will come back to my own personal efforts as well. These kind of
Yeah.
influence each other, right? And I suppose at the heart of that too is this idea that Baha'u'llah tells us that the highest station a human being can achieve is the station of service, right?
Beautiful.
That's core to my purpose, is to be of service. And
Right.
implied in that too is this idea that we are to strive to prefer others over ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
You know, and so there's development in commitment to this twofold moral purpose, but it also it requires a kind of spiritual regimen too, and a feeding of the soul, which allows me to every day manifest more and more those divine attributes like love and kindness and compassion and forgiveness, which
Right.
clearly are essential for being of service to the broader society. Um,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Todd. Appreciate it. Blake, you have any thoughts on more twofold more purpose or what we could do in our personal life to aim at unity for our families, our community, our society, and our world as a whole?
Yeah, I think Todd touched on a couple of key things. First, that the learning process is a collective process. Um,
Mm,
in order for us to follow this map, I like to think of Baha'u'llah's teachings as a map, right? Um,
okay.
and We're confident that the map leads to where it says it does it. And we're confident that the map leads to unity. But we have to learn how to read the map. And this map is taking us places that we may have never been. And that process requires all of us to have our eyes on the map and to offer our insights into the direction that we're going and what's working, what needs to change, et cetera. And in doing so, I think the fact that it's a collective process requires some of those attitudes that Todd mentioned earlier. It requires love. It requires humility. um,
Mm-hmm.
those are things that are foundational to knowledge. We may not always think of knowledge as being something that stems from love and humility, but knowledge
Mm-hmm.
being a collective reality, that's something that you have to have in order to be able to clearly understand and to advance and grow. Um, and so um, we engage in what we call consultation. We come together. We try to cultivate those attitudes of humility and love and respectfulness, and patience, and also candor and truthfulness. And right, those things
That's
have
the
to be.
tough one.
It is. It very much so is. But those things have to be balanced with each other, right? Those are all qualities that we need to perceive the truth clearly, and we offer our perspectives and we share them with one another, with the understanding that no one of us has a perfect insight into how to read this map.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Gotcha.
it's the it's the it's the it's the interaction of these differing perspectives that will give us a fuller picture of where we're at and where we're going.
Okay.
Um, and another thing I think that is something important to bear in mind is that it's not just for us; it's a transgenerational process too.
Mm-hmm.
We're walking a path that was prepared for us, and in turn, we have that moral responsibility to prepare the path for others that are coming after us.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's all part of that process of twofold transformation that Todd mentioned.
Man, thank you, brother.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really excited as I look at um, the Baha'i faith to see my personal spiritual transformation as well can participate and can contribute to the transformation of our world. And I don't know exactly how our world is going to get unified. It's so many divisions and things that stand in the way, but I'm certain that it can be. And I'm believing with you that it will be. And I think that not knowing exactly how means that as we come together and unify small bands of us in different areas, the vision of how will become more and more clear as more and more people unify. The ability to unify the entire world will become clearer as we continue to do it. So we got to make it our own personal aim, step across some of the barriers that do exist, and unify with someone. And I think we'll be on our way. We'll be on our way. I think that could be very beautiful and helpful for my listeners to just have a nice understanding of the vision of the world that the Baha'i faith has. What do you see the world being like if we take some of the principles of humility and love and compassion and we unify as one humanity, one religion under one God? What would the world look like? What would that vision be?
Wow.
I know, just absolutely glorious. It's so beyond words. Sometimes the truth
So,
is, it's really unexplainable.
yeah.
The
So,
best you can.
so I think to me, I have to go back to understanding unity as a process and an outcome,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which again, I think it's very interesting to me how so often it in discourse, it's fascinating. Even in pretty elevated discourse, I find people stuck on thinking of unity as only an outcome and sometimes
Right.
belittled. But Baha'is are trying to learn about unity as a process and an outcome. And that practicing unity in the process has tremendous potential for releasing even spiritual forces that we don't understand. That brings me back to that statement. So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth. Like, so if we think of that, if we're just thinking of unity as an outcome, that statement takes on a different flavor, right? But if we understand it as a process and an outcome, boy, that simple statement becomes so profound. So let me say something about a very practical piece of this.
Please.
You know, Robert, because I think I've talked with you about this, and frankly, we're going to get into this portion of the study circle soon, talking about the law against backbiting, which, in recent years, I find myself meditating on so much and just thinking, my goodness, if this one teaching was adopted universally, it would be such a healing balm. And for people who may not know backbiting, what is that? This is the practice of talking about the perceived faults of others when they're not present. And in our society, this is just like, it's in the air, sadly. We understand this. Baal has very stern words about this. We understand it as the most grievous transgression to backbite against others. And when you think about the discipline that's implied in resisting backbiting, how people say, I can't stop that, it happens everywhere, it takes a tremendous spiritual discipline. But if we're feeding our souls in such a way that we refuse to see anything but the good in others, right? We're also counseled as Baha'is to concentrate only on the good in others. If a person has, 10 bad qualities and one good one, concentrate on that good one. Forget the bad ones. And who am I, right? Like, who am I to be judging that anyway, right? But so this speaks profoundly to the process of unity as well as the outcome. But, to think about souls united in their determination to uphold that law and see others as the noble being they are. Right? Baha'u'llah says, noble have I created thee. Now, he doesn't say, noble have I created Joe. Or noble, noble have I created thee. Everyone, every human being is noble. And when I'm determined to look for that, I'm going to see it. Yeah. When I think about this, it helps me gain a glimpse, right? And every soul who crosses my path, if I can humbly take steps daily to more and more internalize that, that gives me this tremendous opportunity to contribute to the kind of vision that Baha'u'llah, is describing for us.
In the Christian faith, Corinthians, Paul says, love thinketh no evil. And I never knew what that meant for a long time growing up. And right there, what you're saying, to be able to, stop focusing on the faults of others and stop seeing negativity and the failures and perceiving bad motivations of others, but to look at people, like you said, with nobility, with love, with dignity, and to look for the positive. That's what love does. And I think that can bring unity. I think I'm going to start bringing us to a close for our listeners. I want Malik to please share any thoughts on that last couple of questions, any thoughts. But then if there's any passage that you want to share and just illuminate our listeners with before they go from the Baha'i faith that could help them in their life today, or that would be most impactful for them. And then I'll let Mr. Todd do it. And if Mr. Todd, you could close us with one of the prayers from the Baha'i faith, if you can do that. And we'll be out of here. Thanks.
Well, the passage that comes to mind, I think, connects to everything that we've been talking about. And it's short and it's simple, but to me, it's really profound. And it's a verse that says, "Say, all things are of God. All things are of God." Um, and for a long time, I wondered what that meant. And recently, in thinking about it, one of the things that comes to mind is that God is leading all of us on our way. He's providing guidance and inspiration to everyone.
Definitely.
And I'm no one to impose my will or or to in any way try to force anyone to walk in any particular path. To me, that gets right back to what Todd is talking about when he's saying that people are noble. It's up to me to honor everyone, to offer whatever I have to offer humbly, and to receive the response to it in the same way. They may embrace it. They may say no, thank you, and
Right.
all the same, it's up to me to be grateful that I was even able to have something to offer. Because again, all things are of God, and so I just have to honor everyone's walk. That's something that comes to mind for me. Yeah,
Thank you, brother.
yeah.
Hmm. So this is kind of cool. If you'll bear with me for a second, because I had something else picked out, um, but I want to, and this is one of those that I know, but I mean, I think I'm going to mess it up if I try to say it by heart. But it kind of struck me when I was listening to what Malik said, and this is one of the beautiful things about how when we engage in these conversations, especially in a consultative manner, right? Our minds are illumined by what we hear others say, and I had something picked out that is a beautiful passage that speaks specifically about this law of backbiting. But I want to read this instead. And it touches on this nobility. Um, this is from a wonderful book called The Hidden Words of Baha'u'llah. Um, he says, "O son of spirit, I created thee rich. Why dost thou bring thyself down to poverty? Noble I made thee. Wherewith dost thou abase thyself? Out of the essence of knowledge I gave thee being. Why seekest thou enlightenment from anyone beside me? Out of the clay of love I molded thee. How dost thou busy thyself with another? Turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting." Yeah, this principle of nobility, is so at the core that, again, to know categorically that every soul is noble gets at the very heart of the precious work we have to do to eliminate all prejudices, right? This is a command of Baha'u'llah, that we must eliminate all prejudices. And again, it's going to require work, right? But he gives us this blueprint, so to speak, that if we are disciplined about the spiritual regimen, daily spiritual regimen, including prayer and meditating on the Word of God daily, um, that is sustenance for our spirit, and helps empower
Yes.
us to pursue those lofty aims. Again, as you said, Robert, so beautifully, with a posture of humility, you know, that there's a long road, that journey ahead of us, drawing nearer to our loving Creator is a long journey, you know, with new levels of raised consciousness and so forth. Yeah. So you were interested in my sharing. Did you want me to share that particular short obligatory prayer, or was there?
I thought that one would be
Sure.
perfect. If you
Sure.
don't mind.
So that,
Yeah, I would.
yeah. So, you know, Robert, you know that the Baha'is have, well, there are 3 different obligatory prayers from which Baha'is choose.
Right.
One is quite short. There's a sort of a medium length, and there's a longer one. And this short one, of course, obligatory prayers are normally recited, right? It's in the privacy of our chamber, right? But the prayer itself is so instructive. I think really in some beautiful ways, it dovetails nicely with what Malik was just saying about that brief passage quoted. But you know, the text of the prayer goes simply like this: I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, to my poverty and to thy wealth. There is none other God but thee, the help in peril, the self-subsisting.
Thank you so much, Mr. Todd, for sharing that with us. I think all the listeners will be able to meditate on many of the things that we've said. That prayer in particular reminds us that we need to look to God to see Him accomplish through humanity the unity that you both brilliantly and beautifully spoke to us about. I'm excited about growing spiritually, personally, but also making sure I contribute to the transformation of our world. And I think all of us can do well to do that. I thank y'all so much, Mr. Malik, Mr. Todd, for sharing this time with me. I'm very excited to learn about the Baha'i faith, to share the Baha'i faith with others, and to grow as an individual and a community member through the teachings of Baha'u'llah. Thank you so much, and y'all have a
Thank you
great
so much.
night.
This was an honor.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us, Robert. And
That was wonderful.
yeah, I'll see you on Saturday, right?
Cool.
For study circle. Yeah. Excellent. Wonderful. All right.